For the second and final part of the campaign for the American presidency, we are going to talk about what we haven't talked about yet. Right, we're right here on the cusp of the two parties having their conventions, typically late summer, typically mid to late August, maybe early September. Um, and then, of course, there's a short run from that point, roughly September 1st to early November, so September, October. About a 2 month time frame here from the convention to the general election. All right, so let's get going. All right, so let's talk about those party conventions in the late summer. That's coming up here, of course, in the current electoral season for the presidency. The Republican National Convention, the Democratic National Convention. The way it's worked out, typically, almost always, is that these are essentially coronation ceremonies. The one with the most delegates is going to get that nomination, and that's typically been decided definitively relatively early on in the primaries and caucuses. So by the time you get to late summer, this is essentially a done deal. I mean, the last ones, the last primaries and caucuses, I believe, are in mid-June, and those are super late as it is. So by the time you get to late August, it's over. There's almost always a very clear front runner who's going to win that nomination. So in some ways, there's not too much drama. The media used to be required by the government to cover both conventions gavel to gavel, which was insane. That's no longer the case, obviously. So typically, the media will provide only minimal coverage of these conventions because honestly, they're not all that interesting. What happens at these conventions? Obviously, somebody is nominated and is officially declared to be the candidate for the presidency for that party. The platform of the party is constructed. That's important for party insiders, important for almost nobody else. Right? This is where we stand on the Affordable Care Act. This is where we stand on abortion. This is where we stand on same-sex marriage, and so on. What is dramatic about the convention is typically this is where the presidential candidate will announce their vice presidential candidate. That's a kind of a big deal. That's a way to build some interest in these conventions. And I think we've talked about this. So some presidents will choose somebody who they think will help them win the general election. Others will choose someone that they believe will help them govern if elected. Examples of the latter would be Obama choosing Biden, and then W. Bush choosing Dick Cheney. I think for McCain back in the day, he announced his early because he was trying to beat W. Bush. Sarah Palin, he hoped, would clearly not help him govern, God forbid, but would help him maybe win the election. Didn't work out that way, but I think that was the hope. Okay, so what else is significant about these conventions? Primetime speeches. Typically, each party will identify a rising star or rising stars and give them a primetime speaking slot when the media might actually be covering the convention. And so you will often get, let's say, a Bill Clinton giving a speech at, gosh, that must have been, oh, who would that have been? Maybe the Dukakis, or oh, who was it who ran after him? I honestly can't remember, but whoever the Democrat was prior to Clinton, who did not win the general election, I think they featured Clinton for a primetime speech, get some attention. Ronald Reagan, when Gerald Ford was nominated, Reagan gave a primetime speech. Obviously, next time around, Reagan was the nominee. Same for Obama. So this is a chance for each party to identify rising stars and give them a chance. I think the Republicans last time around gave Bobby Jindal a chance and he fluffed it. So some of them make good on it, some of them don't. A couple other things really quickly. These conventions can be strategic. The best one I can think of is the Republican convention in 2004. It was going to be a close race. The decision was made to have the convention on September 11th of that year, 2004, with the obvious symbolic significance of 9/11. And it was held in New York City, right? Counterintuitive. New York City, home ground for liberal Democrats. But the idea here was let's go to part of the ground zero for 9/11. And that was brilliant, right? Brilliant marketing by the GOP. Decision made, I believe, by Karl Rove. Um, so, who did they feature at that convention? Primetime speeches as a way to market the W. Bush candidacy in 2004 in what promised to be a close election. Karl Rove, again, brilliantly chose Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? Moderate Republican from California, very popular, obviously, to give a speech. Not a rising star necessarily, but somebody who would help market the GOP as friendly to independents, middle of the roaders, moderates. Um, Rudy Giuliani, a 9/11 hero, Republican, but also had been, right, mayor of New York City. So again, a centrist Republican. Because the knock on W. Bush was that he was too conservative to win the general election against John Kerry. So you market the party as relatively centrist. Whether it is or not is a different question, but that's how you market it. Arnold Schwarzenegger, brilliant choice. Rudy Giuliani, brilliant choice. And the third one, guy named Zell Miller. At the time, I believe he was a senator from Georgia. He was a Democrat, although he was a conservative Democrat who endorsed W. Bush over John Kerry. So it was a way for the Republicans to stick a big old thumb in the eye of the Democratic Party. Hey, look, one of your own is endorsing the Republican. How about them apples? Plus, right, it was a signal. Hey, if you are a conservative Southern Democrat, you should consider voting for W. Bush over John Kerry. So this was brilliant strategic positioning by the GOP in 2004. The location of their convention, the primetime speakers, brilliant. Also, very quickly, you might want to check out that YouTube clip. What do political scientists fantasize about? A contested convention in which there is no clear front runner. A number of people could win. Typically, one of two people could win. That almost happened with Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, but Obama had just enough of a lead that he was able to win that thing cleanly. But the fantasy is a contested convention. You had something like that in Chicago in 1968 for the Democrats. It was not pretty. Um, the mainstream candidate was Hubert Humphrey, right? LBJ's vice president, but he was seen as part of the whole Vietnam fiasco. He was seen as a war president, if you will, or a war presidential candidate. The more popular choice for Democrats, rank and file, was Eugene McCarthy. He was against the Vietnam War. And back then, too, look, most of the delegates were party bigwigs. The party elite back then still mostly controlled the conventions. These days, it's more party rank and file, participating through primaries and caucuses. Back then, primaries and caucuses were held, but they weren't that significant. Most of the delegates were party elite. So the party elite, the establishment, was behind Hubert Humphrey. Rank and file was behind Eugene McCarthy. Humphrey won easily, but it was profoundly contested and resulted in all sorts of difficulties for the Democrats that I think helped lead to Humphrey's defeat by Richard Nixon in 1968. So a fantasy, right, for political scientists to have a contested convention, but a nightmare for the parties. They don't want a contested convention. They want a party, a coronation ceremony. Right. So after all of the nonsense of the primaries, the caucuses, the Democratic National Convention, the Republican National Convention, where presidents, right, the nominees choose their vice presidential running mate, it's on to the general. So the conventions wrap up in late summer. So we're basically talking about a sort of an election season, a campaign season in the general that runs from roughly September to early November. September, October. It's 2 months, about a 2 month run. Is that right? Yeah. All right. And always, right, that election is held on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. Little historical glitch of ours, little tradition. Although increasingly, right, we do have, of course, early voting that makes it more of a 2 to 3 week window. Raise and spend big money for sure, right? That's still important. Big money doesn't always win. Ask Hillary Clinton. She raised way more than Donald Trump in 2016, and obviously she lost. Quick note about that, and I think I talked about it before, but Donald Trump has proven to be exceptional at getting free media coverage because he's so entertaining. right? So that's essentially advertising that he does not need to pay for because it's being covered by the media. He gets a lot of that. Some call it free media, some call it earned media, right? Earned by being entertaining. So that's been a huge advantage for Trump because he hasn't always raised the most money, but he's much better than anybody else at getting this media coverage that acts as a form of campaign ad. Let's see. Forswear federal matching dollars. That's become a prehistoric artifact of the deep past. The first presidential candidate to not take federal matching dollars was Barack Obama in 2008 in his run against John McCain. The deal with federal matching dollars is if you accept the deal from the federal government and limit how much you raise, which is the key there, they will match everything that you raise one for one, right? So I don't know what the ceilings are these days because it actually doesn't matter anymore because nobody takes those dollars anymore. But let's say the ceiling is $300 million, right? If you raise $300 million, the feds will match $300 million and you'll have 600 million to spend on your campaign, right? Historically, that was a good deal for presidential candidates. Barack Obama decided in 2008, you know what? I think I can raise more than 600 million without taking any federal matching dollars, right? Because if you don't take the federal matching dollars, you no longer have a ceiling on how much you're allowed to raise. So I think he ended up raising, I believe, right around $1 billion, somewhere in that neighborhood, right? So he made a smart strategic choice. Don't take federal matching dollars, blow up the ceiling, and outspend your opponent who did take federal matching dollars, John McCain. And of course, Barack Obama, maybe partly for that reason, but obviously for lots of other reasons, right? Had a very successful 2008 election, one going away. So starting in 2012, Mitt Romney running against Barack Obama, neither candidate took federal matching dollars. And that's been true right up to the present. Focus on the key battleground states. All right, because of our electoral college, and it's winner take all in just about every state, right? If you win the popular vote in a state, you get all the electoral delegates. Electoral delegates, right, are parceled out with a formula. How many senators and representatives serve in Congress from your state? That's the number of delegates you get, right? So every state gets at least two because of their two senators, and then add into that the number of members in the House. So Nevada right now, right, we get 6 electoral college delegates. You need 270 nationally to win the presidency. So yeah, we get 6, right? Because we have 2 senators and 4 members of the House. California gets, I think, 55, 2 senators and 53 members of the House. Winner take all, though, right? Winner take all. 2 small exceptions where they do the House delegates by congressional district vote. So that can produce some split decisions in both Nebraska and Maine. But that's minor, insignificant. Generally, it's winner take all. So what does that mean in terms of candidates deciding where to campaign? You campaign in the states where you think you have a chance of winning. Because if you don't win, you get 0. If you win, you get 100%. You kind of see how that works, right? The logic, the strategic logic. So that means, right, that in most states, there's no reason to campaign in a reasonably close presidential election. California will go Democratic, Texas will go Republican, New York will go Democratic, Mississippi will go Republican. You get the idea. Most of our states are kind of done deals before the campaigns even begin. And look, if a Democrat is competitive in Mississippi, that means it's going to be a landslide election. So even then, Mississippi doesn't matter. You see what I'm saying? So in a reasonably close election, and that's what we have these days, right? They're always 50-50. Most states don't matter. They're not on the campaign map at all. That's weird. What are the states that matter right now? Michigan, Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and perhaps North Carolina. When I used to teach this back in the day, uh, Florida and Ohio were fundamental to that calculation. They were both 50-50. They're no longer 50-50. Much to the deep chagrin of the Democrats, Florida and Ohio are now both solidly Republican. Although some states that didn't used to be competitive, right, are now competitive, used to be more Republican and now more 50-50, like Arizona, like Georgia, like North Carolina. But overall, I would say the electoral college math these days tends to favor the Republican Party. They have a bigger map to compete on. Democrats, I think, have a smaller map to compete on. That's just is what it is. Used to be the opposite. So, yeah, right. So it's winner take all. 7 states. That's where the action is. That's why here in Nevada we get so much campaign stuff going on every 4 years. If you lived in Utah, you would get none of it. If you lived in California, you get none of it. Pretty crazy. Uh, so that's number one. That's the most important thing to say about presidential campaigns. They're narrowed down now to 7 states. And then, right, tell your story to voters. Tell them how fabulous you are and all the wonderful things you'll do, and denigrate your opponent and try to marginalize them as implausible and ridiculous. Debates. Yeah, that's got a new twist here. I mean, the general conventional wisdom has always been don't screw up in a debate, don't say something stupid. Historically, that was considered to be a big deal. I remember once Gerald Ford, God, I'm old. Gerald Ford was debating, Jimmy Carter in 1976. And he made a comment that Poland was not under the control of the Soviet Union. And if you know anything about the history of the Cold War and the Iron Curtain, that was a ridiculous thing to say. I think he was speaking aspirationally. Like, ideally, Poland would not be under the control of the Soviet Union. It is a separate state actor, right? But realistically, at that time, it was under the control of the Soviet Union. Of course it was. It was like a puppet state, right? So that blew up on Ford. That was considered to be a mistake that really hurt his campaign. Today, we would consider that to be pretty minor. You just double down on that and deny the facts and come up with alternative facts. But back then, it was a more traditional environment. Uh, so that has been the historic sort of vision here for debates. Avoid big mistakes. Donald Trump came along and said, "Here, hold my non-alcoholic beer. I'll say all sorts of insane things that are obviously not true. I'll be deeply inappropriate in all the ways, and it'll benefit me. And it'll benefit me." So that might be unique to Donald Trump. He's a unique figure in so many ways. So that conventional wisdom does not seem to apply to Trump, but he might be a one-off. So, in political science, we want to be careful about that. How much do we generalize from that one case study? We want to be a little cautious until we see how things go once Trump has left the stage. But then the real twist, right? Well, that's an important twist, actually. But the other twist, right, is Joe Biden. We know now, and we knew to some degree at the time, partly depending on, quite honestly, what media you consumed. Although I think all the media had observed that Joe Biden didn't look super great in public, didn't sound great, didn't move very well. There was a sense that he was getting awfully old, which he obviously was and is, and that it might be problematic, right? That was exposed in a big way at that first debate in 2024 between Biden and Trump. It was an unmitigated disaster for the Biden campaign. Um, so my understanding is over time, and I've seen this in some of my own family members as they aged, right? Good days, not so good days, bad days, good weeks, bad weeks, not so bad, not so good weeks. Right, sort of a bumpy ride as you get older with a long-term trend in the wrong direction. It looks like this is what was happening with Joe Biden. I guess it is happening with Joe Biden, where even now he still has good days and even good weeks. All right, but fewer and fewer and more of the problematic times. So it sounds like at the time he was extra tired, had been traveling around the globe, was just back from a global trip. It was late in the day, early evening, mid evening.
like all the worst possible conditions, which obviously, right? If you're running for president, none of that should really matter. I understand that. But we should also know, just in terms of understanding, it was probably his worst case scenario situation. And it all came out, right, in a big rush, that he came across as deeply incompetent. I would say at the time he was probably somewhat incompetent, which is hardly, I'm damning with faint praise here, hardly ideal. But I don't think he was catastrophically bad. You know, I think that one performance sort of exaggerated all of the worst elements of his decline. Um, right, and then of course mounting pressure from within the party to leave the campaign, and we know what happened from there. All right, so we know that debates definitely matter. Not so much for the policy substance, let's be serious, but for the performative aspects of that campaign tradition that we have here in America. All right, so as examples of how this has gone the last two times, let's look at 2016 ever so briefly and 2020 ever so briefly, and maybe anticipate 2024. In 2016, Hillary Clinton, although we'll say now, right, that she ran a terrible campaign and she was a terrible candidate, she ran a perfectly good campaign and she was a perfectly decent candidate, right? If you're looking for perfect, don't look at American elections because people are not perfect. Our candidates are far from perfect because we're far from perfect. So anyway, Clinton runs a perfectly good campaign. She's a perfectly good candidate, right? She wins the national popular vote by over 2%. Not shabby. I couldn't do that. I'd be lucky if I get 2.1 votes in a national election, right? But right, what did it come down to? Those 6 states, right? Those 6 states that we just got done talking about. That's where the action is. If you don't win at least 3 or 4 of those states, you're not going to win the presidency, right? And she lost 5 out of those 6. Of the 6, the only one she won was little old Nevada, and that didn't help much because Nevada's small. I think the big 3 there, I believe, in terms of number of delegates, are Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Yeah, so what did Trump do? Almost miraculously, he won Pennsylvania by the skin of his teeth. He won Michigan barely. He squeaked by in Wisconsin. Close call in Arizona. Barely squeaks by in Georgia. Kaboom! He gets all the delegates for those 5 states. He's on his way to the White House. That's how it works, right? The national popular vote is like a beauty contest, right? It doesn't really matter. It's insignificant. It's symbolic only. You got to win state by state in those 6 states, period. It's a heartbreak for Hillary Clinton and a semi-miraculous win for Donald Trump. In 2020, almost like cosmic justice, right? The tables are flipped. Biden, in this case, wins the national popular vote by almost 4.5 percentage points. Wow. And more critically, because that's only a beauty contest, more critically, right, he wins all 6 of the battleground states. All 6. He runs the table, almost miraculously, by super thin margins in every one of those 6 states. Holy crap, you couldn't make this stuff up if you were writing a script for a movie. He wins all 6 by super thin margins, agonizingly thin margins. All right? Heartbreak for Donald Trump. And baseless claims that he was cheated out of his victory. He was not. He was in the same spot as Hillary Clinton. But at least Hillary Clinton could argue, bloody hell, right? I won the popular vote. I feel a little screwed over. Trump lost the popular vote by a lot, and he lost to college, and he lost all 6 battleground states, albeit by incredibly thin margins. Yeah, so basically, the election hardly matters in 44 of our 50 states. That's a crime. That's a crime. And the District of Columbia. They also get electoral college votes. I think they get 3. And of course, the Democrat always wins there by about, and I'm not making this up, they typically win by about 80 points in the District of Columbia. And then the territories, right, don't get a voice. Guam, Puerto Rico, Northern Marianas Islands, forget about it. You don't matter. Maybe they should and maybe they shouldn't, but they don't. All right. 2024. Wow. I have no crystal ball. Be super cool if I did. I do believe, although things could change, and I've been wrong lots of times in the past, it looks like it'll be a rematch of the 2020 election. Right? No one's too hyped about that, but here we go. 2 extremely elderly white guys. That sounds familiar, but they're really old this time. Yeah, they're going to battle it out, much like they did in 2020. Yeah, so it'll come down to those 6 states, people. Eyes on the prize, right? Look at those 6 states. Track what's happening in those 6 states. The other 44 don't really matter unless there's an upset. Right? Don't really matter. If I had to call it now, right, we know, right, that the electorate is always changing. And we know that Trump draws most of his support from those 50 and over. Biden gets most of his support from those under the age of 50. And what happens to the elderly in America over time? Oddly enough, they die. And so, right, that's Trump's problem. We've talked about that. His key supporters are literally dying and leaving the electorate, right? And they're being replaced by young people who are super not into Donald Trump. What's the age demographic that supports Trump the least? 18 to 24. Who's replacing the elderly as they die off in the electorate? 18 to 24-year-olds, right? So the calculus with each succeeding cycle, unless something changes, it gets more and more challenging for Trump and the Republicans. And for now, they're locked into that, and they got to just do a ride or die thing. So if I were to predict, and predictions are a fool's game, but why not? I'm a bit of a fool myself. I would say Biden will probably win the popular vote by at least 5%. I think that gap will continue to grow. He'll roll up huge wins in states like California and New York and New Jersey and Illinois. Now, who will win the correct number of the battleground states? That's much harder to tell. Gosh. It's boring, right? But I'll say 2024 might look similar to 2020. I think it's going to be close again. I don't think, and this is just pure speculation, of course, I don't think it'll be as close as it was in 2020, but what do I know? I say that if I had to call it now from a distance, Babe Ruth calling a shot, I would say, yeah, Biden, assuming he lives, assuming Trump lives. Neither one of those is a guarantee and far from it. But assuming both survive physically until after the election, probably Biden slides by. Probably he slides by a bit more than he slid by in 2020. He probably wins all 6 battleground states, although maybe the margins aren't quite as thin as they were in 2020. But again, predicting the future, it's a fool's errand. But those are my predictions. Okay, so recapping, right, in 2016, Trump won what at the time was a rather shocking victory. I think it shocked Donald Trump. And he won by defeating Hillary Clinton in 5 out of the 6 swing states, albeit he lost the popular vote by a few million. Therefore, right, he had to claim massive electoral fraud because winning the college wasn't good enough. I guess he considers losses to be unacceptably embarrassing, so he'll never admit to a loss ever. All right, 2020, right? Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. Trump loses that election by losing all 6 swing states, and Biden won the popular vote decisively by, I believe, several million. But I would say, right, in those 6 swing states, the popular vote was quite close. quite close. Remember, the Electoral College tends to exaggerate the size of the winner's victory because it takes what might be a series of very narrow victories in the 6 swing states, right? And it translates it into winner take all. So, in terms of the Electoral College, it looks like Biden won by a lot, but he really didn't. He won all 6 by quite narrow margins. I believe in a few of those, it was under 1%. I mean, a win's a win, right? But they were quite narrow margins, and it's all or nothing. And again, right, this time in a more serious way, Trump claims massive electoral fraud because he can't accept the embarrassment, the blow to his ego of a defeat. But a defeat it was. No plausible claims of significant electoral fraud. Don't even get me started on that bullshit. Um, and then you hear my dogs in the background. We have a bunch of rescue dogs here, large, somewhat dangerous, but ultimately pretty affectionate and cuddly, and often quite vocal. Um, 2024, right? Trump wins a solid victory over Kamala Harris, and he does so by winning all 7 swing states, right? Because we're kind of adding North Carolina to that roster of swing states. It was quite close in North Carolina, so I think there probably is a swing state going forward. He wins all 7 swing states. Quite impressive. Um, and technically, right? Well, hold on. You know, Biden probably lost North Carolina. No, he did in 2020. So in that sense, right, this of the 3 election cycles we're talking about, this one was the most impressive in terms of the winner's margin of victory. Now that being said, right, a couple things here. Trump also won the popular vote for the first time, won it by 1.5 points. Um, yeah, I think a lot of that was right. Biden and Clinton had piled up millions of extra votes in states like California and New York, and that didn't happen this time. Certainly, Harris piled up big wins in both of those states, but not nearly the same margins as in the last 2 cycles in those states. So yeah, that would explain almost all of that swing from Joe Biden winning by quite a bit to Trump winning the popular vote narrowly. Now, the popular vote really, those are just for bragging rights. And it might give the winner a little more legitimacy, right? So he wins the popular vote to his great credit, and he wins all 7 swing states. I think in the closest state, Wisconsin, Trump won by less than a point. And I think his biggest win was in Arizona by, I believe, more than 5 points. All right, and maybe, right, talking about the national popular vote, that leads into the final point here. What about mandates? It is traditional for any winner of any presidential election to claim a mandate on specific issues. Political scientists will tell you that's fairly questionable, right? Ultimately, in an election, we don't vote on issues, we vote on candidates. Candidates sometimes fudge their position on the issues. They give themselves a fair amount of wiggle room. Some people might have voted for Trump because of his views on immigration, some because of his views on tariffs, some because of his views on national security, any number of possible reasons, right? That he's funny, he's charismatic, he culturally validates me. So people end up voting for any candidate for a host of policy reasons or even non-policy reasons. So, right, subsequently claiming a mandate on specific issues is always questionable, but all winners do it. All winners do it. So Trump has claimed, right, that everything he has done since then, upon assuming office in January, everything is validated completely by the outcome of the 2024 election. Okay. So his claims of a mandate are on all issue fronts in all ways, everything. That's an extreme claim. Trump's an extreme guy. Um, so part of me says, well, that can't even be taken seriously. But a lot of people take him seriously. So I would say, right, that when you win, you do get right a certain amount of room to do what you want. And Trump is exploiting that more than any previous American president, arguably, on all sorts of issues and on all sorts of fronts. He's bold and aggressive. He's definitely having an historic presidency. Whether that's historically admirable or historically disturbing, I guess history will tell us the answer in the future. But for now, you would say certainly historic, certainly historic. Um, what else did I want to say about mandates? Yeah, so one can be critical of these claims for any winning candidate, and maybe more so in Trump's case because he's so extreme in his claim of a total mandate on everything to do whatever he wants. That seems exceptional. Um, and we know, right, from public opinion polling that right now, we the people, uh, there's no majority support for anything that he's done. He's underwater on approval ratings on all issues, even immigration, certainly the economy, and a number of other issues. He does not have majority support in public opinion polling on what he's been doing so far, right? Because some of what he's done, a lot of what he's done has been extreme. His core supporters love it; they can't get enough. But his core supporters, right? That's probably 40% of voting Americans. The others that are kind of a little more iffy on Trump, but they did vote for him, a little more in the middle. Um, a lot of those have peeled off given some of his behaviors in office. So in that sense, you could really be critical of his claims of a mandate. But once you're in power, there's a lot you can do. Whether you claim or don't claim a mandate, whether that claim is persuasive or not, is almost immaterial. Power is what power is, right? Once you have it, you can do a lot of things, whether people like it or not. It may not be all that consequential, especially because Trump doesn't have to run again. I do think Republicans who need to run again going forward for Congress, for example, they're going to carry some of that burden with them, congressional Republicans, in the midterms and probably in another 3 years as well. But we shall see. Thanks.